Welcome, history enthusiasts, to another deep dive into the minds that shaped our world. Before we embark on this fascinating journey into the psychology of Napoleon Bonaparte, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our explorations into history's most captivating figures. Today, we're not just telling the story of a conqueror, we're peeling back the layers of one of history's most complex psychological portraits, a man whose mind was as strategic as his battles were legendary. Picture this: a young boy from Corsica, speaking French with a thick accent, mocked by his classmates, growing up to crown himself Emperor of France. How does that transformation happen? What drives a person from obscurity to reshaping an entire continent? Let's unravel the enigma that was Napoleon Bonaparte. Born on August 15, 1769, in Ajaccio, Corsica, Napoleon entered the world just 1 year after France acquired the island from Genoa. This timing would prove prophetic, as young Napoleon grew up caught between two worlds, neither fully Corsican nor fully French, an outsider status that would fuel his relentless ambition. His father, Carlo Bonaparte, was a minor noble who skillfully navigated political waters, securing his son a scholarship to the prestigious military academy at Brienne. Imagine being 9 years old, torn from your Mediterranean island home, thrust into a cold French boarding school where your peers ridicule your accent and call you the little Corsican. This early isolation forged something crucial in Napoleon's psychology: an iron determination to prove himself superior to those who looked down upon him. At Brienne, Napoleon discovered his sanctuary in books, devouring works on history, geography, and mathematics with an intensity that worried his instructors. He particularly obsessed over the lives of great conquerors like Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar, not merely reading their stories but analyzing their strategies, their mistakes, their psychological tactics. This wasn't casual interest, it was systematic study by a mind already planning its own ascent. His fellow students remembered him as brooding, intense, organizing elaborate snowball fights with the precision of actual military campaigns. Here, we see the emergence of what psychologists might recognize as a classic compensation mechanism: the outsider channeling feelings of inadequacy into extraordinary achievement. The French Revolution erupted when Napoleon was 20 years old, and while others saw chaos, he saw opportunity. His psychological makeup perfectly suited these turbulent times. Where aristocratic officers fled France in horror, Napoleon stayed, recognizing that merit could now triumph over birthright. His first major psychological victory came during the siege of Toulon in 1793, where he didn't just display tactical brilliance, but demonstrated an uncanny ability to inspire loyalty in common soldiers. He would walk among them, remember their names, share their hardships, creating a psychological bond that traditional aristocratic officers never achieved. This wasn't calculated manipulation, but rather an authentic expression of his own outsider status. He genuinely identified with these men who, like him, were fighting for recognition in a world that had previously excluded them. The Italian campaign of 1796 to 1797 revealed Napoleon's full psychological arsenal. At 26, commanding an army of demoralized, underfed soldiers, he transformed them through pure psychological warfare, not against the enemy, but within his own ranks. He understood that soldiers fight not for abstract ideals, but for glory, pride, and material reward. His proclamations were masterpieces of psychological motivation. Soldiers, you are naked and hungry. "I will lead you into the most fertile plains in the world. Rich provinces and great cities will be in your power." He wasn't lying. He delivered on these promises, creating a feedback loop of success that made his armies believe they were invincible because, psychologically, belief often creates reality. But Napoleon's psychology went deeper than military tactics. He possessed what modern psychologists might call exceptional emotional intelligence combined with narcissistic personality traits. He could read people instantly, understanding their desires, fears, and motivations with almost supernatural accuracy. Yet this gift came paired with an inability to see limits to his own power. His famous statement, "Impossible is a word only to be found in the dictionary of fools," reveals both his greatest strength and fatal weakness. This psychological cocktail of genius-level strategic thinking, extraordinary charisma, and dangerous hubris would define his entire trajectory. The Egyptian campaign of 1798 offers a fascinating window into Napoleon's complex psychology. While militarily questionable, it was psychologically brilliant. Napoleon brought along 167 scholars, scientists, and artists, presenting himself not as a mere conqueror, but as a new Alexander spreading enlightenment. He studied Islam, wore Turkish dress, and discussed theology with Islamic scholars, showing a psychological flexibility that confounded both enemies and allies. This wasn't mere political theater. Napoleon genuinely believed he was destined to reshape not just Europe, but human civilization itself. His rise to first consul and then emperor reveals the full scope of his psychological architecture. Napoleon understood that humans crave order after chaos, strong leadership after uncertainty. He positioned himself as the man who could provide both revolutionary ideals and traditional stability, a psychological paradox he embodied perfectly. The famous coronation scene, where he crowned himself emperor, wasn't just megalomania. It was a carefully calculated psychological statement that his power came from his own will, not from tradition or divine right. Napoleon's legal and administrative reforms show another facet of his psychology: the desire for immortality through lasting achievement. The Napoleonic Code, his educational reforms, and administrative systems weren't just about efficient governance. They were about encoding his mind into the very fabric of society. He once said, "My true glory is not to have won 40 battles. Waterloo will erase the memory of so many victories. But what nothing will destroy, what will live forever, is my civil code." This reveals a man acutely aware of his mortality, desperately trying to achieve permanence through institutional legacy. His relationships with others illuminate his psychological complexity further. With Josephine, we see a man capable of passionate, almost obsessive love, writing her desperate letters from campaign, yet also capable of cold calculation when he divorced her for failing to produce an heir. With his soldiers, he showed genuine affection, yet would sacrifice thousands without hesitation for strategic advantage. This compartmentalization, the ability to hold contradictory emotions simultaneously, is characteristic of highly successful but psychologically complex leaders. The invasion of Russia in 1812 represents the ultimate expression of Napoleon's psychological fatal flaw: the inability to accept limits. Despite all rational arguments against it, he convinced himself that one more grand victory would secure his empire forever. The retreat from Moscow broke something fundamental in his psychology. Witnesses described a changed man, still brilliant but now haunted by doubt. The supreme confidence cracked, but not shattered. Even in exile on St. Helena, Napoleon's psychology remained fascinating. He spent his final years crafting his own legend, dictating memoirs that would shape how history remembered him. He understood that psychological victory could outlast military defeat, that the idea of Napoleon could be more powerful than Napoleon himself. His influence on military thinking, legal systems, nationalism, and the very concept of meritocracy versus aristocracy continues to shape our world 2 centuries after his death, proving that psychological impact can indeed achieve the immortality that physical conquest cannot. This psychological transformation becomes even more apparent when we examine how Napoleon viewed relationships and human connections throughout his life. His letters to Josephine reveal a man capable of intense passion and vulnerability, yet these same letters show how he compartmentalized emotion when it interfered with ambition. He wrote to her with desperate longing during his Italian campaigns, yet later discarded her when she could not provide an heir. This wasn't simple cruelty, but rather a manifestation of his fundamental belief that everything, even love, must serve the greater purpose of his destiny. His psychology demanded that personal feelings submit to historical necessity, a pattern that would repeat with his second wife, Marie-Louise, and even with his own family members, whom he placed on various European thrones. The way Napoleon processed information and made decisions offers profound insights into his cognitive patterns. He possessed what modern psychologists might call exceptional working memory and processing speed. Officers reported that he could dictate 5 different letters simultaneously to 5 secretaries, switching between topics without losing his train of thought. This wasn't mere multitasking, but rather evidence of a mind that operated on multiple parallel tracks, constantly synthesizing vast amounts of information into actionable intelligence. He consumed books voraciously, often reading while eating, while traveling, even while bathing. His library on St. Helena contained over 3,000 volumes, and he claimed to have read most of them multiple times. This insatiable intellectual appetite wasn't just about knowledge acquisition, but about pattern recognition. Napoleon saw history, politics, and nature as systems with recurring patterns that could be understood and exploited. His approach to leadership psychology was revolutionary for its time and remains studied in business schools today. Napoleon understood that humans are motivated more by emotion than logic, more by symbols than substance. The creation of the Legion of Honor wasn't just about rewarding merit, but about tapping into fundamental human desires for recognition and belonging. He famously said that men would die for colored ribbons, understanding that the ribbon itself was meaningless, but what it represented, the psychological validation and social status, was priceless. He personally designed uniforms, understanding that how soldiers saw themselves affected how they fought. The Imperial Guard's elaborate uniforms weren't vanity, but psychological armor, transforming farm boys into elite warriors through the power of identity. Consider how Napoleon managed fear, both his own and others. He cultivated an image of fearlessness, often exposing himself to enemy fire to inspire troops. But private accounts reveal a man who experienced fear like anyone else. The difference was his ability to transform fear into focused energy. Before major battles, witnesses described him as almost manic, pacing, dictating orders, examining maps obsessively. This wasn't confidence, but rather anxiety channeled into preparation. He once told Metternich that he calculated everything, even his rages, suggesting that even his famous temper tantrums were partially performative, designed to intimidate and control. This psychological self-awareness The ability to observe and manipulate his own emotional states for strategic advantage set him apart from his contemporaries. The concept of glory occupied a central place in Napoleon's psychological landscape, but not in the simple way we might assume. Glory for Napoleon wasn't just about personal aggrandizement, but about meaning-making in what he saw as an otherwise meaningless universe. Having come of age during the Enlightenment, Napoleon had absorbed its skepticism about traditional religion and authority. In this philosophical vacuum, he created his own meaning through action and achievement. Glory became his religion, history his judge, and posterity his afterlife. This explains his obsession with controlling his narrative, why he brought scholars and artists on his Egyptian campaign, why he established newspapers and controlled information so carefully. He wasn't just fighting battles, but authoring his own myth in real time. His relationship with death provides another window into his psychology. Napoleon displayed an unusual comfort with mortality, both his own and others. He could walk through battlefields strewn with corpses without visible emotion, yet he also instituted some of the first systematic casualty reporting and veteran care systems. This wasn't contradiction, but compartmentalization. He viewed death statistically when planning campaigns, but personally when writing to widows. He could be moved to tears by individual suffering, while simultaneously accepting massive casualties as necessary. This psychological flexibility, the ability to shift between macro and micro perspectives, between emotional and analytical modes, was both his strength and ultimately a source of moral blindness. The way Napoleon understood and exploited group psychology was centuries ahead of its formal study. He recognized that armies, nations, and empires were ultimately psychological constructs held together by shared beliefs and emotions. His bulletins weren't just propaganda, but exercises in collective psychology, carefully crafted to maintain morale and unity. He understood that people needed narratives to make sense of their suffering and sacrifice. Every defeat was reframed as strategic withdrawal, every victory as destiny fulfilled. He created a psychological reality that often became self-fulfilling, where belief in victory contributed to achieving it. His treatment of conquered peoples reveals another facet of his psychological approach to power. Unlike previous conquerors who simply imposed their will, Napoleon sought to transform the psychology of the conquered. The Code. Napoleon wasn't just legal reform, but psychological revolution, replacing ancient feudal mindsets with modern rational legal thinking. He understood that lasting conquest required conquering minds, not just territory. This is why he established schools, reformed universities, promoted meritocracy wherever his armies went. He was engineering a psychological transformation of Europe, creating citizens instead of subjects, a transformation that would outlast his military defeats and shape European consciousness for generations to come.